thank you so much for joining us here, spending your night with us. It's fantastic to see you all again. My name is Lora Painter. I'm the weeknight evening anchor at ABC 10 and a proud board member of your Sacramento Philharmonic and Opera. This is my second show of the season, and joining me on stage are some very special guests. Please give a warm round of applause and welcome to our guest cellist, Zlatomir Fung. And a lovely familiar face. If you were here last season, you will remember Ari Pelto, but he is now our principal conductor and artistic advisor. Yes, your new home. Yes, it is lovely. The first of many talks we will have. So we know that Mr. Fung has to get ready and warm up. He will be leaving us in a few moments, but sir, we will try and pick your brain as quickly as possible and as painless as possible. It is so nice to have you here. It's very exciting. You're playing a very difficult and challenging piece to ELGAR. And I wonder, how do you prepare for a piece like that? It's quite rigorous and vigorous, to say the least.
It certainly is. You know, the ELGAR Cello Concerto it's one of our staples. So it's a piece that I've known since I was very young. You know, I've known it by ear. And in the past 2 years, I've played it about a dozen times. So when I revisit it, it's always kind of a new challenge. You know, the challenge is to find something new in it. Of course, every experience with a different conductor and a different orchestra is going to have wonderful quirks to it. And I hope tonight is no exception.
Okay, you want some quirks?
Throw me the curveballs.
Throw a few curveballs at him.
Yes. Yeah. Zlatomir and I actually worked together last year in Detroit, about a year and a half ago. And we played a very different concerto together. We did Boccherini concerto, which is not done all that often. Whereas ELGAR is supposedly the world's most famous and most beloved concerto. Boccherini is much less well known. Also a wonderful piece, but incredibly different, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, the premiere of this concerto was a disaster, right? Do you want to tell them about it? Or do you want me to tell them?
Sure. So I think the story goes that ELGAR, you know, who at the time was already a very famous composer across the world, but especially in Europe, he had programmed this new piece to be played, and the conductor of the program hogged all the rehearsal time for the symphony.
Yeah, actually it was another composer named Coates who was premiering one of his pieces, conducting his own piece, and took all the rehearsal time. And poor ELGAR was conducting his own piece, actually the concerto as well, didn't get nearly enough rehearsal time, and so the reviews were horrendous. It was just a horrible, horrible premiere, and strange to think that, ironic and wonderful to think that some years later it became the world's most beloved concerto, and everybody thinks it's wonderful, but at the time they thought it was, they couldn't understand it, but probably because the orchestra had such trouble playing it, because they didn't rehearse.
And were they up against a few barriers as well, because he was one of really the last romantic composers, as I understand it, and it's coming out, the piece came out after World War I, so the whole atmosphere and culture of music and attitude of the world was really changing, so they had all that going on in the background as well, right guys?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. It's a piece I think that's very much about the end of an era, sort of this period in the British Empire, which ELGAR was witnessing, sort of its sunset. You know, actually, funny thing about the premiere story. I had the opportunity to premiere a concerto earlier this year, and I kept telling the composer, "Oh, you know, don't worry if the premiere is a disaster. It's a good sign. That means it'll be a masterpiece."
Because Firebird was as well, right? So.
Firebird was as well. There are many examples, but yeah, for this one was really a disaster. And it's true. I mean, ELGAR. First of all, he was self-taught. And so he was, in a sense, he was not part of any school of composition. He was a violinist himself, and very accomplished violinist. In fact, he wanted to be a professional violinist as he was growing up, and he was part of a very musical family. And then at a certain point when he was in his teens, I think he realized that he wasn't going to be a violinist on the level that he wanted to be, and was composing a lot. I think he started composing smaller things for churches and stuff when he was already 9 or 10 or 11 or something like that. So he was already did a lot by the time he gave up violin as a profession. But the fact that he was self-taught, in a certain sense, I find pretty evident of his musical style, which has elements of romanticism for sure, but it's very individual. It doesn't sound like anybody else. It sounds like Elgar, right? Don't you think?
I totally agree.
I find it very interesting. So before we dive into, Zlatomir, what this piece means for you as a cellist, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Where did you grow up, and where do your musical influences come from? I guess, what is your first musical memory?
Oh, sure. So I live in New York now, but I actually grew up first in Corvallis, Oregon, and then in the Boston area. It's my first time in Sacramento, so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, I would say my first musical memory, so I began to play the cello when I was 3, and my first musical memory would be, I guess it was maybe my first or second recital, where I think it was something like where I went on stage and I just sat down, and then my teacher who was accompanying me at the piano played like 2 chords, like ba-dum, ba-dum, and that was the end of the performance. My performance was just sitting on stage and taking in the audience's presence.
But that was a pedagogical move on your teacher's.
But there were people in the audience.
That's so funny.
They didn't pay to see it, of course. But
I'd like to pay to see that now.
Is that a typical thing?
I never heard of it.
For youngsters starting out?
I never heard of it. My son is 10, and he's a violinist, and he's played in a few small recitals, but I never thought of telling him, just go out and stand there for a minute and then get off stage.
Get the nerves out a little bit, get used to being on stage, and wow, very interesting. Do you play other instruments as well? When you were first coming up, I know you went to Juilliard, and I wonder what that experience was like, and the other musical instruments that you may play or have interest in.
yeah, well, I studied a bit of piano as younger, when I was in my younger years. But actually, a funny story about piano is that when you go to Juilliard, you have to take secondary piano, and you have to do a little exam when you get in. And I'd like practiced really hard, and I went in for the exam, and they were like, okay, play a scale, and play this piece. And at the end, they were like, okay, great, you passed. And I was like, I don't have to take piano. They're like, oh no, you just passed like the very beginner course. You still have to take 4 semesters in piano.
Oh.
So yeah, all those lessons didn't really pay off.
Very interesting. And Ari, we're so excited to have you here in your new home here in Sacramento. And I'm curious how one becomes a conductor.
Well, I don't know about one other person than me, but I was a violinist, and halfway through my time at Oberlin Conservatory, where I was getting a degree in violin, I developed some problems with my hands, and I couldn't play for a year, and at that time, when you're 20 years old, and I had been playing violin since I was 6, and I was a determined, very serious violinist, and I was crushed by this challenge, this issue that I faced, and so much so that because there was a bit of a doubt of whether I would fully recover with this issue, I immediately changed course. I couldn't handle the idea of maybe being able to play and maybe not being able to play on the level that I wanted, kind of like Elgar, I guess. And so I started studying conducting at that time, and that's my story. Although, and I've stuck to it. Although once I was telling that story, and somebody who knew me from before, like when I was a bit younger than that, said, "Oh no, you were always interested in conducting. It's not true. You just did that." I truly don't remember that. I thought I wanted to be a violinist.
They could sense it. There was something in your persona, in your aura.
Maybe. I think you made it up.
They could envision you commanding an orchestra.
Perhaps. And it was actually, it ended up being a very natural transition for me. And so I suppose maybe it was like one of those things that happen to all of us where something that seems terrible and a terrible blow turns out to be the right thing that happens in your life.
A blessing in disguise, right? Yeah, Ari, thank you. It's time for Mr. Fung to get ready, and you'll be hearing him live here on this stage very shortly.
Yes.
So please, a big round of applause. But Mr. Pelto is sticking around.
I'm going to stick around.
So the show continues.
I have to practice too.
That is true. So I had a lovely opportunity to speak with you earlier this week, right here on this stage. It was a story that we had showed at 11 p.m. On ABC 10, and it was really an exclusive with you getting to know you. And one thing that I discovered is that you are quite the romantic. You have a very deep, passionate soul, and that really brings your interest to Brahms, right? This is where you resonate. He resonates with you, and this piece is very special. Tell us a little bit about him and how he connects.
Well, I mean, the whole program, as you know, is a romantic program, and it's true that in music particularly, I am a romantic. I loved playing, when I was a violinist, I loved playing romantic music, romantic concertos and sonatas and all of that. And so for me, Brahms is a special, I feel a special love and connection to Brahms. And in fact, not this past time I was here, but the time before, I don't know if any of you were here, but I did the second symphony about almost 2 years ago, maybe. And so I always look for an opportunity to play Brahms when I can. And this symphony is his fourth symphony, his last symphony, and many consider it his greatest symphony and one of his greatest works and one of the great symphonies ever written. And if you don't know it, I think you would find it too. It is very romantic, but it's also, the thing about Brahms is Brahms is very romantic, but also incredibly structured. It's something that makes performing Brahms a challenge, and a great, wonderful challenge, and very challenging for the orchestra, is that he wrote with a very tight structure in mind, like Mozart or Beethoven, very clear structure, but with this romantic coloring, let's say. And putting those two things together is, for me, an extremely exciting challenge. I'll give you an example of this tight structure. The last movement is based on a Bach cantata melody, a piece that Bach wrote in something like 1707. And so more than 150 years later, this one melody, it's 8 bars, that came from Bach, Brahms used as the structure of the last movement that you'll hear tonight. And these 8 bars, this one 8-bar phrase, happens throughout the entire movement until the very end. And it could be an interesting experience for you, should you choose to do this, to try and hear this exact 8-bar melody as it goes.
Give us a little clue.
As it goes dee da 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 dee da dee da.
And so we'll listen
That's
for
it.
that in the fourth.
You'll hear it very obviously in the first 8 bars of the last movement. After that, it's going to be a tremendous challenge for you to find that 8-bar melody again, because he's so innovative and masterful in how he uses those exact notes. They get hidden and passed from one instrument group to another. It doesn't come at the beginning of the bar, it happens somewhere in the middle. Sometimes it's pianissimo, and other times it's forte.
Wonderfully done.
Yeah, so I'll tell you now, first of all, you don't need to do this. This is not an assignment.
But there are extra points if you do get it.
Yeah, you definitely don't have to do it. And you certainly don't have to do it to experience the beauty of, this is one of the central truths about music, is that you can experience it in any way, right? You can be an expert and experience it through expertise. You can be utterly inexpert and not interested in thinking about things in an analytical way and love music, right? Isn't that true? That's the great gift.
How do you put your own spin on Brahms, being such an admirer of his work yourself and being a musician yourself as well? When you're up there on stage conducting, what do you like to do to kind of alter and put your own twist?
I don't. I mean, what I strive to do with every composer is to understand what he was wanting and trying to express, and doing my best to reveal that and understand myself what he's looking for, help us with the orchestra together to understand it. And I don't think in terms of, not with any composer generally, I really don't think in terms of I'm going to bring my special stamp to it and figure out some way to do it that nobody's ever done before. I really truly just try and figure out, what he wanted to express and express it the best that I can.
And a purist approach and maintaining the integrity of the piece.
Well, yes, I think of it as advocating for the composer, and simply trying to let he's the master and I'm not. I'm the one who's trying to help to give you the experience of Brahms.
It's a beautiful concept. What do you think Brahms' message is with this piece?
Okay, so the great poet and writer Goethe once described the greatest pleasure as residing in the closest proximity to danger.
Ponder that.
Yeah, and somebody later on described Brahms as being an embodiment of that idea, and I agree with that. And so for me, there's in the tenderest moments or most optimistic moments from Brahms, there's the lurking danger of some tragic heartbreak or a storm or something. And conversely, in the most the stormiest passages, you feel compassion and the pull of tenderness somewhere in you. So I think for me that's a major part of experiencing Brahms that I
Do you find there's a similar experience in listening to Mendelssohn as well? He's also quite powerful. I know he's a few decades before. The pieces are separated, same century, but separated by a couple of decades there.
Well, the thing about Mendelssohn is, back to Goethe for a moment. Goethe.
All roads lead to Goethe.
Yeah, somehow. So Goethe had met and heard Mozart when he was young, when Mozart was young, and Goethe was a bit younger. When Goethe was a bit older, he met the young Mendelssohn.
Wow.
And he wrote that Mendelssohn far outshined Mozart in his talent at a young age. So we think of Mozart as the greatest prodigy of all time. I do. And yet Mendelssohn is very much in that category. He was a madly crazy talented kid. And this piece, Hebrides, he wrote when he was 21, But when you hear it, it's a very mature work. He wrote his great masterpiece, the octet, string octet, when he was 16, and it is one of the towering pieces of chamber music repertoire. So I think it's sadly, or whatever, I don't know if it's sad, but for Mendelssohn outshined as a great genius by Mozart. Yes, it's so this was written in 1830, the Hebrides, and so it's smack in the middle of Romanticism, and one of the major features of Romantic art is the idea of the power of nature and how that relates to man's inner soul, and the fact that we are part of nature. You know, like in the classical period, there was a sense of trying to understand and define nature, right? Like gardens in Paris and beautiful landscaping and understanding
investigative science,
all of that stuff. That's classical period. And in Romantic art, at least, there's kind of the idea that no, you can't. We don't tame nature. Nature is something that is deep inside us, and we are part of. And so, in this piece, and I talked about this a little bit with the orchestra as we rehearsed. This piece is both, in my mind, both a kind of a musical description of Fingal's Cave, which is a real place on the west side of Scotland. There's a little island and there's a cave, and there are crashing waves against this, cliff, and just exactly the image of a desolate Scottish island with mist and all
that. It sounds like
and
that.
you hear that. That's absolutely there in the music, and yet with this idea of what is Romanticism. Equally, I think you feel the inner soul of a human experience.
Well, it's something, Ari, that we definitely look forward to hearing and experiencing live on this stage very shortly. It is your time to prepare as well.
Yes.
So please, warm, loud, ruckus round of applause.